these issues that I've tried to introduce without dealing with the details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for setting the context for a forward-looking and an impactful dialogue. So indeed, the Future of Energy Conference is not just a mere talk show. It's not one yet another event, but it's a call to action, where over the next 2 days, we will have different ideas, challenge assumptions, and showcase solutions to Africa's lingering financing challenge. So to help us do so, still on the session, Beyond Aid, Unlocking Innovative Financing Pathways for a Just and Inclusive Energy Future. I want to kindly invite the moderator for the panel discussion, Ms. Ikal Angele. Ms. Ikal Angele is the board chair for Africa Center of Energy Policy, and she is the director and co-founder for Friends of Lake Turkana in Kenya. So before Ikal, let me introduce her properly. Ikal is an accomplished environmental activist. She is the co-founder and director of Friends of Lake Turkana, a grassroots organization dedicated to promoting social, economic, and environmental justice in Lake Turkana Basin, one of Kenya's most vital and vulnerable ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, your moderator for the first session, the board chair of ACEP. Thank you very much.
Thank you. ACEP keeps upgrading me. When I started these meetings, anyone who's been here for the last 8 years know I only talk about local. But now they're getting me to talk about the African situation. So I'll ask my panelists to please come to the front. I'm not going to mention your names, you know yourselves.
Greetings to the panelists. They deserve a round of applause. Everybody in the hall, raise your hands and give them a resounding applause. Discussing issues of importance. Oh, Nicholas, Dennis, Jeke, Emeka, and Nana.
I'm going to break protocol. I'm not Mabel. I will not say give them the whole profile. I'm going to ask them to take 30 seconds to tell you what's not on the profile. So each of them is going to tell you something that's not on the profile. We spend so much time talking about the credentials, but I think what really builds us is the things that we don't know about people, things that are not work-related. So I'll start with Dean. Take a minute to say what's not on your profile about yourself.
All right, thank you. I'm thanking you for the opportunity, not for the question. What's on not the profile? Let's see. I'm allergic to dogs and cats and goat meat. So, yeah, that's the interesting part. Thanks.
So, Maureen?
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm a diehard Arsenal fan. How many Gunners in the room? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. And what's not on my profile? I love dancing. That's my exercise. Thank you.
Well, what's not on my profile? I like jollof rice. And it tends to be the Ghana jollof rice.
Thank you. No, it always helps to just break because we tend to know each other about our work, but we just don't know each other outside the work interests. So I just thought that would be interesting. So again, welcome to the panel 1 of the Future of Energy Conference. And Africa has hosted many high-profile initiatives. From Power Africa, for those who started recently, there was something called Power Africa a while back. Then you have Scaling Solar, you have SE for All, and now Mission 300. Yet the statistics are the same. 600 million people remain without access to electricity. And so today we ask, what will it take, not just to add megawatts, as has been said in the morning, but to achieve reliable, affordable, and inclusive access? can we move from fragmented projects to a transformational financing ecosystem that reflects African realities and priorities? We will explore in this discussion both ambition and the risks that come with financing energy in Africa, and what structural shifts are needed to enable a just energy transition. So my first question will go to, again, it will be both Dean and Dr. Somorin. What structural barriers beyond financing have prevented flagship programs like the ones I've mentioned earlier, the Power Africa SE for All and the AFDB's New Deal, from achieving transformational change in energy access?
Thank you very much. I thought I would be the last speaker, but here we are, so let me do my very best. When it comes to your question, Ikal, I think beyond how we want to envision Africa's developmental agenda and we look at energy access issues, we need to acknowledge three structural deficits that currently exist within the ecosystem across the African continent. One is a lack of food sovereignty, which is perpetuated by the lack of clean cooking alternatives. The second aspect is obviously the lack of energy sovereignty, which is then in turn looking at 600 million people as mentioned, but in 2030 we're looking at 720 million people without energy access if we continue on this trajectory. The third is low value content of exports relative to imports. Essentially, we produce what we don't consume, and we consume what we don't produce as an African continent, meaning that we sit at the bottom of the global value chain. Essentially, what this causes is what we call structural deficits that weaken African currencies. That in turn causes ripple effects. We call those ripple effects a trade deficit. At least from 2023 stats, is that we are exporting goods worth $627 billion annually, and we only import 457. So if you subtract that, we're looking at 170 billion in trade deficits. That's how much we're losing as an African continent. If we look at the Green Climate Fund, it's 10 billion pot. If we look at the climate finance promised in 2015, it's 100 billion. If we look now at the flow of money coming from the global south to the global north, it's an annual amount of $2 trillion US. That is what we are facing as the African continent. Now, furthermore, if you look at the Bretton Woods system, when Africa was at the peak of its independence, we unleashed what we call the Bretton Woods system that gave birth to what we know as the World Bank. Now, in those times, in the 1950s, there was no African country independent, meaning the systems that we put in place, the systems that we set up, were actually put in place to perpetuate inequality, colonialism, and racism. And that is the same economic system that currently manages how we understand money flowing in and out of Africa. And that is the structural, systematic failure that we need to address, which is why it's important when we're having these discussions. The very first item is, how do we reform the global financial architecture in a manner that does not perpetuate inequality, but is grounded on distributive finance, where it is fast, feminine, and also funded. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Dr. Somorin.
Thank you. It's always a privilege to be part of this conversation. And the reason why I like this is because this is a miniature of something that's happening outside this room. At the global level, whether at COPs or at UN Summit, we're having this conversation. This conversation is happening. Whether even in classrooms as well, it's happening. And it's been happening for years. The question is, what is going to be different, or what do we need to do differently going forward? Now, perhaps I want us to look at ourselves. We cannot ignore that there are challenges with the system of the world that we live in today. It is not a fair world. There's nothing equitable about it. It's just a game of business. And when you are able to do certain things better, they call it leverage. When it's not, then it's unfair. So that's a world that we're living in today. But I think for us, we also need to ask ourselves certain questions. 60 years after independence, where are certain things? Some countries, what they have today as installed energy capacity is what another country is producing in a week. What they have over 60 years is what someone else is producing in a week. And they are not out there talking about all of these inequalities at the global level. I want to focus on two major issues on my side, and I think they're linked to finance. The first is, as a continent, we haven't done well to understand the fundamentals of the political structures that hold the flow and the allocation of capital. We haven't understood it very well. Money or finance in whatever form does not exist in an institutional vacuum. They're very much nested within certain political and economic structures and institutions that can decide who gets what and who doesn't get. And I think it's very important to know that, because if we're not able to relate to that, we may find ourselves developing policy frameworks, having all of the capacity building, but they're not translated to investment on the ground. And what that means for us collectively is to be able to begin to ask ourselves, are there new alternatives to a structure, a system that we can create that can benefit us? The answer is yes. We need to redefine partnership. We need to move into an age where the partnership that we seek today should be the partnership that benefits us. We choose people who choose us. We choose ourselves first and foremost, then we don't choose people who choose us, not necessarily people that colonized us or we've had historical ties with. And the moment you get to that fundamental and bold point that you want to partner with people who align with your goals, who truly see the need for your development, and at the same time who value who you are, I think the conversation begins to change. So, sorry if it's not about how do we write proposals for money. That is not the problem here. It is to understand the deep-rooted political structures that hold the flow and the allocation of capital. The second part of it is then to begin to see how do we begin to use our own resources to do things differently in order for people to then begin to see us as not people to be helped, but people to be partnered with. And that shift is important. The structure today is, when you talk to a lot of people, they are talking about we need grants, we need cheap loans for that. And it's money from another people, from another taxpayer that you are expecting. How do you begin to use your own money, even if it's limited? And I like the point that the gentleman who made the presentation made. We need our financial management system to be able to see how do we increase our own skin in the game. How do you explain a situation where you're inviting someone else to invest in a project? It's a monumental flagship project. It's going to achieve all the development results, but you want them to finance 95% of it. I mean, ask yourself as an individual, why do you want to push the risks to someone else and not to yourself? So it's very important that we redefine how do we allocate our own resources, and how do we begin to push forward with the investment that we have, and then we move away from this idea, come and help us, to come and partner with us. Thank you.
So just pick, and because I know you are, by virtue of alignment to the Mission 300, so what financing and design principles must underlie what is currently the platform on the table, Mission 300, to ensure, one, it delivers affordable, reliable, and inclusive energy, especially just building on what Madame Rukiaya said around off-grid, particularly for off-grid and marginalized communities. What are some of the quick suggestions that you have based on the current, what's on the table, but also on your suggestion around what are our current resources? And
look, we need to commend the thinking behind M300. It's very ambitious, because basically you were saying that you want to achieve the result in 5 years that you've not been able to achieve in 60 years. And it's good, because if you run after the sun and you can't chase the sun, at least you can catch the moon at some point. But what I find fundamental in M300 is create a structure, a partnership arrangement where we spread and share risk, as opposed to putting it just on one entity. So at every point in time, we'll develop a national energy compact. And so for about 15 countries that are part of the initiative, develop energy compact, develop it internally, bring the right stakeholders together to be able to define what is the national pathway. And I think it's very important. We have to recognize that the pathway to electrification in Zambia may not necessarily be the pathway in Nigeria. And so understand what is the local context, national strategy and pathway together. Then number two, bring in the partners, particularly the private sector, the local people in the country. And then use the catalytic capital that comes from NDB to be able to manage or reduce the risk. You reduce risk, but you also reduce the cost of capital. And so that is why the AFDB, together with the World Bank, are heavily invested in this. At the end of the day, the bulk of the money will still come from the government and the private sector, not from the MDBs. But MDB money can be very catalytic. It can reduce risk, it can reduce the cost of capital, and it can help you to achieve scale and speed together.
I saw Mr. Appiah partly shaking his head, agreeing and sometimes disagreeing, so I'm going to ask him the next question. So how can governments embed the Mission 300 within their national development plans and decentralized strategies to ensure long-term affordability, rural inclusion, and accountability?
Well, just to add to what has been said, I think some of the structures and programs we have are regional-based. We have to decentralize them to fit the environment that we find ourselves. So elsewhere in markets where access is significant, like let's say in Ghana, energy access is over 80%, whereas in the sub-region or the same West African countries like Sierra Leone and others, energy access is significantly below 50%. So you don't pick those regional programs and just implement them across. You'd have to tailor to suit the country. So whereas in countries where the access is significant, what you are looking at is support generation sector so that people can have reliable energy, industries can grow, etc. In countries or territories where access is quite limited, your Mission 300 program and other regional programs should support access to energy. Because if people do not have access, productivity will be low and economic activity will be slow. And so we should have programs tailored to various countries to assess or to meet their needs. And the other thing is that governments should also have policies that support the private sector to drive inclusivity or growth. Historically, we've had government championing every activity. Government should be in the business of governing and also driving policies and programs to support private sector participation. We should allow the private sector to drive some aspect of our energy transition or energy growth. And a very good example is what programs are the programs you implement to support private sector participation. Like historically, we've had PPP programs, IPP programs, and lately we are not hearing a lot about that because we are not creating the right environment for these players to play in the market. So where in countries where government is consistently and constantly giving subsidies, it's a risk because any private sector participants will not be guaranteed that subsidies going forward. And so we should tailor our program to suit the specific needs of our country. If we're doing that, then that helps to support the regional policies that we have. We've had all the programs you mentioned, the 4seal. These are programs that we've had historically. Over the 60 years, we've not been able to achieve. It's been even over 100 years and etc. We've not been able to achieve what others are doing and others have done in few months. Why? Because we have not tailored the regional programs or even worldwide programs. We go for these conferences, we write the policies, but we don't tailor them to suit our countries or our territories. And so we should tailor the policies to suit the needs of our countries.
Thank you. And just to think through, and it's just an open question, what does ownership look like when money is coming externally? But something that we can sort of chew on. But to Ms. Nana, so beyond sovereign guarantees and subsidies, what innovative mechanisms can de-risk the energy projects that everyone's talking about? Because you're talking about private sector, you're talking about different financing. So what, beyond sovereign guarantees and subsidies, what innovative mechanisms can de-risk energy projects while protecting citizens from high tariffs? Because we've always seen it's either the citizens will bear the burden either by debt or by high tariffs. So how do we protect them?
This is working now? Yes, it is. Thank you. Thanks for that question. I think this is a critical question, certainly for the future of energy access and fiscal resilience in Africa. Diversifying finance sources is a necessary evolution for African governments. It is essential, but without the structural safeguards, it risks becoming a fiscal trap. So it's important that we look at it carefully. In looking at it, the challenge is not just about attracting financing. or looking at broader sources of capital. We're looking at designing investment frameworks that balances affordability, reliability, and long-term sustainability. So saying that, we're looking at what it is that we can do, what are some of the key structural reforms that we can do to ensure that we're able to attain, this essentially ties into SDG 7. So top for me is looking at independent tariff regulation. It's important that we establish autonomous regulatory bodies that are able to set tariffs that are transparent, with transparent methodologies, and again, facilitates less political interference to ensure that we have tariffs that are transparent and does not give shots to the end consumer. The process is transparent. A typical example, and for me, I'll talk about the WACP at any given opportunity. The West African Gas Pipeline is regulated by the WACP Authority, which sets the process for tariffs setting every 4 or 5 years. It's a transparent process whereby we look at how cost-effective that tariff is, also looking at the end user, the governments that are at the end of it, setting low tariffs that they are able to transport gas to generate energy for the end user. Going beyond that, we can look at local financing mechanisms, and this takes a lot of effort in developing domestic capital markets. It's important that we're able to do this, going beyond local green bonds that was talked about, mentioned earlier, and infrastructure funds that can mobilize domestic savings. In researching for this project, I came across the statistics that in Ghana, at the end of 2024, private pension funds, in fact, funds sitting in pension funds, that is being invested in short-term deposits with minimum returns. It's about 80 billion at the end of 2024, 80 billion Ghana cedis. That's let's say $8 billion US. It may not seem a lot, but it's just sitting there, and we can leverage on that. 57 billion Ghana cedis of that is in private pensions, and that is something that we can leverage on in terms of local domestic financing to support this agenda. Thank you.
So maybe just to add to that, I mean, you say it's a thing of the past. And what's sovereign guarantee? It's just a system where a country underwrites the financial obligation of a private sector operator in the event of a default or the occurrence of some termination event to take on the liabilities. And some of the liabilities include, so for instance, if you develop a power project, that power project is expropriated by some of these, let's say, military regimes that we've seen in West Africa recently. What it means is that they are taking on the obligation of the debt providers. They are going to take on the obligation of the termination cost, because once you terminate the contract, there's costs that arise out of that. And then you are taking over the cost of the private equity or the private sector cost or capital that you brought in. Sovereign guarantees are no longer sustainable because it's a blanket check that you are giving to a private sector operator. If today you terminate that contract, that private sector operator can attach any property belonging to the state. So Ghana terminates a contract today, they can go to our embassy in Guyana, in UK, and attach it, sell it, and then defray the cost of their project. That's what it means. So we have moved away from sovereign guarantees. And the other reason why sovereign guarantees are no longer sustainable is that a lot of countries in Ghana, close to about 50%, are high risk of debt distress, or either debt distress or defaulted on their debt. So alternative options lately are what you call put-call options. Put-call option has been used to finance the energy project in Ghana, for instance, the early power project, and in Nigeria, the Azura project. We also have comfort letters. So government can give comfort letters to support projects. We also have standby letters of credit. The reason why you are giving sovereign guarantees is because of the credit worthiness of the off-taker. Now, if the off-taker's credit risk is low, people are ready to do the project. So we should enhance the credit worthiness of the off-takers by allowing them to charge realistic tariffs. If they are charging realistic tariffs, there will be no need for sovereign guarantees. Thank you.
All right. And I think something that, again, Mr. Rukaya mentioned around dollarizing, I wanted to ask Dean, in this particular case, are we seeing do we think we are ready for long-term power purchase agreements in the local currency? Because in consideration of what you just said around the financing way it is.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're on the right path, but also the right path we need to compromise on a lot of things. And some of those things essentially is, we've talked about sovereign guarantees and how they reduce risk while we're moving away from that, but we're also not talking around the word risk. Because Africa is a continent with plenty renewable energy potential, number one. And we've got a significant percentage of the world's supply for transition minerals. That is the region we are classifying a risk to invest in, essentially. And that is a problem. And essentially, if we're looking at it from that lens, we need to come to terms with establishing independent regulatory bodies as suggested that are actually grounded on creating an Africa credit rating agency where we ourselves can own the narrative of what can be funded and what is not fundable. Because currently, at the moment, that decision is not held in Africa. It's held in Washington, D.C., for example. It's held in London. It's held in every other city in the world other than one in Africa. And that is the cycle that we need to break, essentially. The other aspect is creating local currency loan facilities, which are very, very important. Because, for example, if I'm going to be a Nigerian oil gas company, and then I, for example, ship out my crude oil because I don't have refining capacity, because my country doesn't have the skills or tech transfer, I'm going to ship that out, and I'm going to sell it in the market. And obviously, for example, some countries such as Germany or France, for example, will buy that, right? Now, essentially, they have bought that with enough money because they're trading in euros, in US, and in pounds. Now, because I've sold my crude oil, I also need power as Nigeria, so I'm going to buy that as a finished product into my economy. But remember, I do not trade in euros or pounds or US dollars, I trade in naira. So I need to then convert my naira into euros or pounds or euros. But when I initially sold my crude oil, it was a different foreign exchange rate at that day. That means the volatility of the foreign exchange does not take into account as the Nigerian economy are now buying a finished product, meaning I am not breaking even as a country. Meaning in order for me to make up for that deficit, I need to go back to the World Bank and borrow more money. In order to keep the cycle going, I'm going to then ship off more crude oil. So we need to establish more local currency loan facilities, which is what I believe Mission 300 is doing. And I applaud them for that. The free facility has been exceptional because essentially we are giving countries loans pegged according to the country's currency, the local currency, not US dollars and not pounds. And in a way, you are empowering that community or that country in this instance to actually own and chart its path forward, essentially, and not be victim to the different volatility of the foreign markets because we're not in control of them, essentially. And I believe that is how we're going to win this battle, owning that narrative. And again, the big question around ownership also becomes quite important as we unravel this discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, so to Dr. Somorin and Nana, so what concrete regional mechanisms, again, because we've talked about regions when Mr. Pia was talking, what concrete regional mechanisms could help African countries hedge financial risks and stabilize electricity pricing? Because again, we've had that through the morning, electricity pricing keeps coming up. So what are some of the suggestions you'd have in this particular case?
Well, I think embracing the regionality of the solutions is very fundamental. I think of other regions in the world, and as Africa as a region on the own, but also within Africa, we haven't really maximized, perhaps optimized our power pool arrangements well enough. And we could do a lot better with that. You know, it was very funny in the morning when the minister said, we get gas from Nigeria. And then we hope to sell electricity back to them. And you ask yourself, you mean Nigeria does not know what to do with its own gas? But I mean, it's just interesting to be able to see that. But yes, but that is itself is a partnership that can happen at scale. And the regionality part of it is to recognize comparative advantage. I would embrace that idea if the cost of electricity generation from gas is cheaper in Ghana than producing it in Nigeria. So then the comparative advantage in Ghana then makes it sense. It makes sense for it then to be exported back to Nigeria. So recognizing what are the unique value points within the region, but also recognizing what are the energy sources within the region, and then get a sense that where do we get investment that can give scale, and that investment, and we can facilitate the infrastructure. So one of the things that we've done at AFDB is basically to invest in transmission lines. Today, we have almost a 2,000 kilometer water transmission line from Ethiopia all the way to Kenya to be able to evacuate power in Ethiopia and sell to Kenya. Because the cost of production of hydro in Ethiopia is ridiculously lower than the cost of hydro production in Kenya. And so the regionality of it, but then the question then comes in. What happens when you then have countries who are protecting energy sovereignty? Who don't want to be too exposed to the politics of relationship and power changes. So obviously that's the question for another day. But we recognize our regionality, but we must also invest in the infrastructure that can make that regional arrangement to be possible. Thank you.
Nana, just to add to your question is more to look at, so do you think that ECOWAS and the ACFTA can facilitate pooled energy markets or shared investments? Do you see an opportunity like that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the YP is a typical example. It does exist. It's been in operation for 15 years now. And this is a cross-border regional project. Nigeria, Togo, Benin, and Ghana. It's in action. We're transporting gas. The minister talked about it. The gas that they're buying from Nigeria is coming through the YP and supporting regional energy production. Beyond that, I would like to make a comment in terms of hedging risk, and I would like to quote a report just to bring into perspective what the currency volatility adds to financing costs. And I'll quote, African energy projects are often financed in foreign currency and face high capital costs, largely due to exchange rate volatility risk. We all know that. This definitely stifles investment. However, it's been quantified for the first time that shifting project financing to local currency is essential. With complementary policies and de-risking tools, we can reduce capital costs by up to 31% and provide electricity cost savings of up to 29%. And I think that is something that we need to look at with broad, cross-border hedging risk in local currencies, using platforms to facilitate financing in local currencies, like regional payment systems. We talked about the regional pooling, local currency bonds, and regional exchanges to support financing energy projects. Thank you.
So, and lastly to Mr. Appiah, how can African governments redesign sovereign guarantees to avoid unsustainable debt? As we know, I think there's a debt conference happening in Accra, while attracting private investment.
Thank you very much. So, like I said before, why do investors ask for sovereign guarantees? They ask for sovereign guarantees to protect them from obligations that arise from developing projects. And so the projects that they develop, they take obligations from senior debt holders, they take obligations from the promoters themselves, they put their equity in it, and they also expect a return on their investment. So 3 or 4 of these obligations or expectations are put in the project. So if something happens and the off-taker or the government is not able to pay, they lose all of that. So because of that, they will ask for a sovereign guarantee. And the sovereign guarantee gives them comfort. But what we can do for us as African countries to move away from sovereign guarantees is to charge realistic tariffs. Realistic tariffs for the various customer categories that we have. In Africa and for most African countries, households pay cheaper for electricity than industry. The reverse must be true, where industries are paying cheaper and households are paying more. What happens is that because of political reasons, in elections year, we suppress the tariff. And then right after elections, we just allow it to roll. And then we start screaming. So if government puts in subsidies are what we call deferred payments. If you are not asking the person who is supposed to pay 1 cedi or 1 kwacha for every kilowatt of power consumed, you are asking the person to pay 50 cents, for instance, or half of that. That 50% will have to be paid by a taxpayer. will have to be paid by some other source. So you are just deferring payments. And a very good example is what happened in Nigeria. When the new administration took over, they removed subsidies, and you see the distortion in the economy. So subsidies are not sustainable. So we have to charge realistic tariff. The second strategy to adopt is to support these investments by creating the right exchange environment. We should avoid imposing exchange control programs which serve as disincentive. For instance, if the person wants to repatriate profit, they should be able to repatriate the profit and still keep the capital in the country. If you put in some stringent or onerous exchange controls, it's a disincentive to investment, and that's what we've seen in some countries. There are proper structures to put in place to avoid sovereign guarantees. So if you are worried about the price of your product or your services swaying up and down, go for hedge contracts. If you are worried about expropriation, and that's something we've seen, for us as advisors, we've seen about 3 or 4 African countries that have gone through the military regime. A lot of the projects that we were working on there, the developers have abandoned the projects. Why? Because we've seen expropriation. These projects are being seized. Projects are being seized or taken over by the military regimes. And obviously, the question is whether they will be able to run them. They will be able to run them efficiently. That's something we will answer another day. But if you are worried about expropriation, go for political risk guarantee, because the sovereign guarantee will not be available, but the political risk guarantee will help you mitigate that risk. If you are also worried about non-convertibility of the currency that you have, so in countries, historically, for instance, in Zimbabwe and other places, when you invest there, it becomes very difficult to convert your currency into any other currency. So you can go for political risk insurance, or you can go for hedge contracts. So these are very innovative ways to hedge your risk rather than relying on sovereign guarantees, because sovereign guarantees are no longer the options available. Thank you.
So to all of you, and because you mentioned risk, institutions, and we all agreed that there's a fragmentation of projects. So what institutional safeguards, either regulatory independence, accountability, local engagement, are essential for building investor trust? And do we have models, perhaps like co-governance models? I think the minister spoke about partnership, PPPs moving beyond the typical PPPs to looking at new ways. So what are some of those institutional safeguards that we could start looking? Can start from you going that way.
Yes. So thank you very much. We've mentioned PPPs in the past, and I always say when I visit my colleagues in East Africa that they say, yeah, don't talk about triple Ps, because in where we live, triple Ps are called perpetual pending projects. We want to move away from perpetual pending projects to projects that are not perpetually pending, but that are running. So we want to do IPPs, we want to do projects with partnership that work. And so joint venture agreement with specific focus to develop a captive power for a mine is something that we can easily execute. So we go through these PPP processes and it creates problems. So for the first time, Botswana signed an IPP project. And it's a very rigorous process, a very interesting process. The reason why a lot of PPPs and projects have failed is that we don't structure them properly. So if you go through a proper structuring process where parties have right obligations, the obligations are fairly distributed, they will not fail and they will not be perpetually pending. So you should go through the proper structuring process, and this project will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Yao. I think I'll take the opposite view from perpetual pending projects and give you an example of a PPP that is working. And again, we come back to the WACP. This is a public-private partnership project venture between private entities and the governments of Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria. It was over 20 years in the making. FID was reached in 2005. Construction was completed by March 2011 when commercial operations started. And it has been in commercial operation, but I think it's a PPP that sets the example in the sub-region that we can look at and improve upon as an example.
Verify. Thank you. You said something that really caught my attention, and that is for us to, in a simple word, normalize using transaction advisors. And I thought it was really brilliant because We, in the public sector space of many African countries, we need a private sector DNA, a private sector mindset, a private sector way of doing things, even in the public sector. If all you have to do is find a group of super brilliant, experts, a group of 10, 20 people in a particular office, and all they are doing constantly churning out what of the latest thinking in the world of finance, what are some of the latest thinking in structuring deals, you could do so much with that. And I think I want to encourage all of you, just have a little bit of interest in how South Korea and Malaysia and Singapore did a lot of things. It wouldn't happen with everybody at the same time, but it needs to happen with a group of young, powerful thinkers in the government and just create the space for them to be able to provide innovative thinking into that. We've seen that. I mean, we have the privilege to be working with a lot of government, Ministry of Finance, and you'll be shocked to know that even within the Ministry of Finance of many African countries, they don't even understand the language of finance. And it's really, you really have to go through a lot of back and forth and to be able to say. And we've also seen countries that have had a private sector approach to things and the difference in that, in the quality of structuring and ultimately in the ability to raise capital. So we'll put that on the table. It's very important to encourage our government entities to infuse themselves with a new DNA. Thank you.
Thanks. Two things quickly. One is SDRs, special drain rights. When Africa could not tap into the COVID-19 vaccine, we hit the SDRs and we had access to the COVID-19 vaccine. And that's because commonly the globe recognized it as a crisis. Now, the climate collapse is a crisis. The energy access issues in Africa is a crisis. Thus, we have every right to be able to tap into SDRs in order for us to de-risk our environment, in order for us to tap into a just transition agenda that is grounded on development for Africa. So that's one thing that our governments can try to push for. The second aspect is, for me personally, in any case, and I say this in my personal capacity, is I want to ground this a lot on the transition minerals that the continent has. And it's a significant amount. We've got copper, we've got manganese, I'm not going to list them all, but we have that. What we don't have is a currency that's strong. So we need a currency issuance mechanism that is backed by transition minerals, essentially. And how do we come about creating a mineral valuation framework that can then be injected into such a framework or currency issuance mechanism that can help African countries be global players within the emerging green global economy, essentially. And I believe only then can we then competitively compete within that market in order to tap in to the right quantity and quality of funds needed for us to transition to where we need to be. Thanks.
All right. I mean, it's an interesting idea. It's just that question, I think Dennis mentioned it, the protectionism within countries, the way countries are actually now, let's take, for example, DRC is already making deals with America, so that the individual, it then, deals another political conversation around how, practically. Before I open it up, I just want, one question to each of you. Which is the one action or shift needed? And you've mentioned some of it, from project-based financing. Again, while Nana is mentioning WAGP, I want to sort of look beyond project-based to transformational financing ecosystems for Africa's energy. Because I think the challenge is that right now, whether it's the solar desert project, it really is what is being used to frame the African conversation that then doesn't address some of the institutional problems that we keep seeing within the financing sector. So what is the one shift that you think is important to move from the sort of the big blips here and there, to just really engaging with the financing?
So I think the good thing is we've got sophisticated citizens, to say. A lot of people read, have access to the internet, etc. So we should engage the public a lot more to get them to buy into projects. So historically, people just oppose projects for just the sake of opposing it and just fight against for the sake of fighting against it. But we should engage the public a lot more. We've seen projects that have been successfully executed because the people in those communities bought into those projects. So if we educate them, they will buy into the project, they will support the projects to come aboard.
Thank you. I think I'll take the lead from there. It's about stakeholder engagement, getting the right people involved, the public, private, the government, together and establishing a framework that works for the African continent, for our context, and not just taking a blueprint from somewhere else and bringing it to Africa. Thank you.
Well, one shift I would like to say is very much within the policy domain, but it's not just any policy or policy framework. See, a policy framework that is market creating. And I want to repeat that, policy frameworks that are market creating. Most of our policy frameworks is about we're doing this, but they're not very specific about the market opportunities to capture the how, and as well as the strategy around that. So a bit of a different way of doing our policy work. Thank you.
Thanks. For me, it's Africans celebrating Africans. How do we come up with solutions for Africans, by Africans, as Africans? Because essentially when you come up with the different projects, we tend to look towards other countries that are not African to come up with the right solutions and the technical assistance needed when we have homegrown talent and we're not celebrating and allowing each other space enough to tap into that talent. Because I do believe that the only person who can tackle the energy access issue in Africa is someone who's actually experienced what it feels like to sleep without lights on. And you cannot expect me to believe someone who's not experienced load shedding to have the answer. It's impossible. So we need to start owning our narrative and our destiny as Africans. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to find out how many minutes do we have for questions? 20 minutes? All right. Okay, we'll do 10 minutes of questions. Let's make questions. We are Africans. I know we like to talk. It's fine. We'll talk over tea and lunch. And they are still here, so let's just take questions, short and sharp. I am going to cut you off if you take too long.
Okay, the hand at the back. And 2. And 3. Okay.
Thank you very much. Listening keenly, I want to find out, in our context, Africans and our African leaders politically deploying a transaction advisor with terms of reference. Are you not sure the African leader will fire this transaction advisor? What is your advice? To me, I think it's not about the transaction advisor, but it's a political decision to either accept or not to agree.
All right, thank you for being very crisp.
Yeah, thank you very much. The speakers, I really enjoyed the program. My name is Dawson, MTN Heroes of Change 2017. The first speaker, the one in the left, I thought he said electricity should be cheaper for factories. And then they put the whole thing to the consumer, the lower people, those other households and so on. I want to tell him that, is he aware there are some institutions here who are not paying electricity? Is he aware? For the past 20 years, they have not paid electricity before. Let me give you a scenario, but I won't mention names.
Okay,
listen to me, I wish I were a woman married to a security man in a barracks where I can have 5 fridges, where I can make ice block and sell. I won't talk again. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Your hand was up?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Insightful conversations. My name is Mariel Google. I'm here representing Africa Future. My comment again is to I forget his name. Yao, yes. Yao, I think the point you make about finding ways to mitigate risk is important. However, the underlying risks must themselves be managed, mostly through policy. And that requires political will. And as Ms. Rufai said, politics always trumps. Unfortunately, it can negatively impact private sector. So in the case of political risk insurance, I have personal experience trying to find PRI for foreign investors in a project. And thanks to a recent default in Ghana, it's difficult to find. And also, political risk insurance only covers the foreign investor, but the Ghanaian investor who is taking that risk is still exposed to appropriation. So we need to change the fundamental risks that exist while we find instruments to mitigate them. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. People are doing well. I'll take the last question for this round, and then Ika, your people will answer, and I'll come back for a last round. Your name?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Fred from the University of Environment and Sustainable Development. I'm a student researcher and I'm studying energy resource economics. So my question is, how can climate finance mechanisms designed to unlock scalable long-term capital, this is in context of Africa's adaptation, needs while ensuring implementation is locally led, inclusive, and aligned to the nationalities or national development priorities? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, Ika?
So maybe let me start, and then the climate finance, I'll leave it for the expert. Doctor, and then, so you answer the climate finance. So first, I'll start with a question on transaction advisors. So in principle, I work as transaction advisor, and I've worked on most of my transactions, or the work I do is just to act as a transaction advisor, particularly to the government. We work for private sector, but we also work for government. The terms of reference for the transaction advisor is developed by the government. So if it's the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, the Treasury Department, if you go to South Africa, etc., they develop the terms of reference for the transaction advisor. And the transaction advisor's fee is based on the acceptable report or deliverables. So if the transaction advisor submits his report to the Treasury Department, they pay them after their report has been accepted. So if consistently you are paying them, and they've been doing this work for 12 months and you have been paying them, then it means that you are happy with their report. So then you don't get to a situation where you are sacking the transaction advisor. The problem we have is that some of the department and agencies do not work closely with the transaction advisor, so they allow the transaction advisor to do all the work, and then they come in later and then raise issues with all their reports. So you should be working closely, and I've worked in countries where advisors' work is monitored on weekly basis, so there's weekly checking by the ministry or department, making sure that they have all the information they need, and they are also reviewing their reports. Sometimes you submit the report, it takes months for you to get feedback. So I think it's important that we work collaboratively rather than sit back and say the transaction advisor is not doing his work. And then uncle at the back, the households. So please, I wouldn't encourage you to buy fridges and be selling the ice blocks. It's the same thing people do in our communities. So they source water that we are all supposed to benefit, and they sell it to us in our tankers, etc. So we should not be doing that. And the reason I say that is that, look at it from this context, that if there is increased productivity, a lot more people will get employed. So if industries are paying less for electricity, ideally, they should increase productivity. And if productivity increases, the economy expands, and this industry grow, and they employ more people. So in advanced economies, or in economies that are growing, that is the norm. In our market, the household are paying cheaper, and they are not even paying. They are stealing the power. The power that you are paying less for, you are stealing it. So that's the problem, and that's why these industries also struggle to pay, because we are not allowing them to taxes, etc. on them. So that's the challenge, but I understand you. Some of them are doing the wrong thing by not paying for electricity. Yeah.
Political risk insurance. I have experienced that as well. We tried to call on it, and the World Bank wouldn't touch Ghana with a barge pole. So We need to look at alternatives, how we can find alternatives. Even on the open markets in Europe and America, they wouldn't even look at Ghana in the recent past. So I agree with you totally on that. Thank you.
All right. So before we get to the climate finance questions, Yao, I want to say that what I was referring to in the transaction advisory work is not just about writing reports. I'm talking of a group of people, including lawyers, that are also there with you, helping you to do some hardcore negotiation so that you don't sell yourself short, you know. So that piece of work, start from the back end part of writing report, looking at that. But going further to do, you know, cost-benefit analysis, thinking of scenarios, you know, and do a number of sensitivity work so that when they now get across the high to the people you're negotiating with, when you come very strong and prepared, they don't throw certain things at you. You know what I'm talking about. So that piece of work is very important for our public actors. On the climate finance work, it's interesting now that where we talk about renewable energy, we have an opportunity to talk about renewable energy and invest. If you have an opportunity to knock on 2 doors in order to be able to get access to capital to do something, I think I'd
transition. And then I'll take one more question and then we'll wrap up.
Before polling, friends, colleagues, and comrades, we will have some time to speak amongst ourselves, and there are many more conversations. We're just trying to manage time, but it doesn't mean the conversations end here. I always feel that the tea conversations are much more deeper than the panel.
Thank you. My name is Pauline, and my question is a very practical one. I believe that conferences like this should cause changes, and that is what ACEP believes in. My question is regards to tariffs. There's a current crisis in Africa. It's happening in Mozambique. Next year, by March 2026, one of Africa's largest smelters is about to be shut down. I don't know if you know about the Mozal project. Mozal produces aluminium and it feeds the EU market. It supplies about 30% of aluminium to the EU. So we are talking about the relevance of Mozal for the energy transition and feeding into the global supply chain. But this company will be shut down next year. It has the risk of shutting down next year because of tariff. And Yao, you mentioned that industry should pay cheaper than households, and I agree with you. That is not what is happening with Mozal. They are negotiating with the government and with ESCOM for so many years, and no progress at all. So the company is forced to likely shut down. My question is to you and my good friend Funsho. What can be done if you were in the shoes of South 23? What would be your negotiation points with the government of Mozambique and with ESCOM? We need to solve a problem. And from here, maybe ACEP and Olufunsho and the AFDBs can go to Mozambique and solve this practical problem, because we are talking about it here. It shouldn't be a talk shop. So I've given you a live case study. Okay. Please help South 23 solve the problem now. Thank you.
Thank you. So the panelists can.
As you say, as you answer your last thought also.
Thank you very much for the question. Ben, that's going to be for you, okay? When you write the first draft, we will provide additional comment on the first draft. But it's a very good point as well. And look, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to invite, my last word, I want to invite you to a side event in the afternoon that AFDB will be leading, talking about some of these complexities. I'll keep it there. Thank you.
Or maybe Pauline, tell the Mozambican government to come and engage me as a transaction advisor, and I'll help them address all their challenges. And we've seen similar challenges even in Ghana. We have a smelter that is also going through a similar problem. And for your information, the Akosumo Hydro Dam was built to support the Ghana smelter. But today, the story is different. So I know that it's the same problem they are having, not only in Mozambique, but in the other countries. So ask them to come and see me.
Thank you. For me, I think the long and short of it is that in looking at financing alternatives, we need to be innovative. We need to look at tariff regulation, independent tariff regulation. We need to look at performance contracts. We need to look at de-risking tools, alternatives beyond political risk insurance and the multilaterals, and also hedge currency risk using regional platforms across Africa. Thank you.
Okay. This microphone is now part of the Africans lacking energy access. I think for me, what we need to be understanding as we unpack all of this is we need to get to a place where we are not managing emissions, we are avoiding them completely as Africa. But at the same time, we need to prioritize the developmental agenda in a different transformative way, right? I want to touch on, lastly, I guess my final thoughts on Mission 300 is if we're going to focus on distributed renewable energy, right, in the solar mini-grid system, it's beyond just installing solar panels on people's houses, because in 2 to 3 years, because of the inequality gap, because of the fact that there is no means of implementation across the African continent, those solar panels will cease to work because they're not being, updated, essentially. So how do we create a system that is sustainable in the long term? We don't want to fix this and have 300 people electrified in 2030, and then in 2035, we're back to 600 million people without energy access. So let's think around those long-term sustainability plans as well. Thanks.
Thank you again to the panel and to all of you for engaging with them. I'd ask you to applaud the panel.
So the panel will take a group photo and then we'll move straight to the next. Please, let's applaud them once again. Thank you very much, Ikao and the team. I know it's midday and people's sugar levels are low and they will need some. But indulge me for the next 30 minutes. We have a fireside chat without a fire where Nicholas Lipolis from the Center for the Study of African Economics would have a small chat with me looking at how we rethink the role of NOCs in financing Africa's green infrastructure. So, Nicholas, please join me. Please applaud him.
Stand here? Oh.
Yes, without a fire. So, I mean, you did some work looking at NOCs in Brazil and Angola, trying to understand how they are also participating in the transition. What are the exciting lessons from that work that you can share with us?
All right, good afternoon. It's officially afternoon now. Firstly, let me greet the ministers, authorities that are here, and thank Ben and the ACEP team for bringing me here. It's a real pleasure. I'll propose something a little bit different from the question. Since this afternoon I'm going to be in a session with NRGI talking about the specifics of the Brazilian and Angolan cases. I was thinking of maybe bringing, just proposing. I know there's a lot of experts here and people who are, in positions that are dealing day to day with the challenges of energy transition in Africa. But, as a humble academic, I thought that I could come here and bring a framework for helping think about the role of national oil companies in energy transition in Africa. So perhaps we could start with that, and then we can have a discussion. Is that okay? I think the starting point for us to keep in mind is that African national oil companies, NOCs or NOCs, are trailing their peers in other regions in terms of investing in green infrastructure, renewable energy, clean energy. And we need to keep in mind that in many existing African oil and gas producers, production is on a downward trajectory in general, has been past its peak. With some exceptions, maybe Nigeria has the potential to increase again, but in most cases, production of oil and gas is on a downward trajectory. And we know that we live in a world that is close to peak oil. And so the tendency in the future is for oil and gas demand to decrease. And especially for countries that are primarily exporters, this can hit the budget, the public revenue and foreign currency earnings and so forth, and incomes very hard, right? Added to that, we have the challenge of energy access, which is one of the themes of this conference. And so putting this all together, there could be a role for national oil companies to play, not only in hedging these fiscal risks that come from the decline in oil and gas demand, but also to help with the domestic challenges for energy transition. So what I'm thinking of proposing today is bringing up some of the factors that NOCs and countries can think about when considering the strategies for energy transition, right? And the framework is focused very much on the organizational capabilities and the energy transition context. So there's three factors that I'd like to bring up. Firstly is technical and organizational capabilities. So these are things like the organizational coherence of the institutions, and we know there are variations across the continent in the NOCs in that space. Secondly, we have the expertise in negotiations with foreign oil companies, international oil companies, which is in many cases the bread and butter of what NOCs do. And then we have things like power within the state. Some NOCs are more autonomous than others and have power to mobilize things domestically more than others, right? The second factor to bring up is the role of corporate governance. This is very important for a well-managed company, right? And so we have things like the composition and role of the board of directors in the company. We have the presence of professional management, distinct perhaps from political cycles. And we have the degree to which a company has a commercial orientation, which is very important, right? It's oriented towards making money and maximizing its business in the long run. The third factor is the context of domestic energy transition. Just countries have different shares of renewables. They have different presence of different actors in the clean energy space. And they might have different their access to capital markets and the development of domestic capital markets and access to international finance. This is, again, one of the themes of this conference. And also the presence and capabilities of other actors that can invest in renewable energy. So how does this apply to thinking about the African national oil company context? We know there's a lot of variation in the continent. So, for example, in Angola, we have Sonangol, we have NNPC Nigeria, the Gabon oil company that have some degree of operatorship. In other countries, the NOC is primarily there to manage the state's stake in the oil and gas sector. We also have differences in commercial orientation. We know that NNPC, now NNPC Limited, after some recent reforms in Nigeria, has become more commercially oriented, right? Sonangol, perhaps the case I know best, it's not, has also, in Angola, there's also been some oil reforms since 2019 that have put greater emphasis on Sonangol's role, commercial role, as opposed to its role as a regulator. And elsewhere in the region, companies are less commercially oriented and still more focused on managing the state's stake in the oil and gas sector. And that translates into different capabilities, right? And then, in some cases, they're also a more recent creation. We know in Gabon, the oil company was created more recently. Same in Congo, Brazzaville, and there's variations across the board in terms of like organizational coherence. And so, when we think also about the role that NOCs can play in the energy transition, the third factor again comes up: the context of the energy transition, right? So we know in Nigeria and in Ghana, there's a great emphasis on gas, right? And so, any conversation about the future of the energy sector is going to be bound up with the gas sector. In others, like Angola, Congo, Brazzaville, it's more hydro-based electricity mix. And then other countries also have different degrees of energy access. We know that here in Ghana, Ghana has been quite successful in extending energy access, similar in a country like Gabon. In others, energy access remains a major challenge, right? And so putting this all together and thinking like in a more propositional way, We think about the strategies that make sense in each context. Well, who are the actors? Has there been enough investment? And what is the role that the NOC can play? Well, I think the key insight here, and perhaps if you want to bring home something from this conversation, and then knowing that I'm standing between everyone and their break, if you remember one thing, it is important that the national oil company focuses on the tasks to which its capabilities equip it for. It cannot do more. You know, if you're a low capability institution, you cannot expect to be investing in grid infrastructure and EV charging stations and whatnot. But if you're high capability, then you can be a little bit more ambitious, right? And one thing that perhaps all NOCs in Africa have in common is that they're the key interface between the private sector, often international oil companies, but increasingly domestic oil companies, and the state. And so that gives them a role as a key broker for investments in green infrastructure. And I thank Ben for proposing this term as my presentation title, because that's the key. NOCs are key brokers in facilitating the deployment of capital in investing in energy, right? And you know, things like joint ventures and partnerships can be good tools to make these investments happen. It's also important that these partnerships are very much focused on capability transfer. And that is one of the key advantages of partnering with international actors. If you're partnering with international oil companies or other entities that have these capabilities, then the partnership has to always be thought in terms of capability transfer. And that's also, you know, it's important to invest in sectors in which the NOC is sufficiently close to the capability frontier, and in capabilities that can be transferable for clean energy industry. So one example is low emissions fuels, biofuels, hydrogen-based fuels. These are areas in which oil companies can use their existing capabilities in managing gases and liquids, and can equip them to invest in industries that can have export potential in the future and compensate for declining fossil fuel revenues, right?
Right. So let me stop you there a bit. If you look at the African NOC context, the NOCs have become part of the political patronage system. And you mentioned one of the key factors as corporate governance. How do NOCs navigate having to be filled with people who virtually don't even have desks to sit on, but still expected to possess the technical capability, the foresight, when the people who control them are only short-termists? How do they navigate that?
Kojo, I have to thank you very much for asking this question, because this is exactly what the next thing I was about to say. How do we build these capabilities, right? And we know that the political context can be very challenging, especially when you have alternations of power. One government comes in, has one vision for the company, another government has another vision for the company, and most dangerous of all, sometimes governments can use the resources of the company for their patronage needs, right? And so here is the importance of building a political consensus. You need to have an elite consensus, a political consensus, on the importance of respecting the technocratic integrity of the oil company, right? And you have to shield them from this political game. I know this is much easier said than done. We have people here who can do the change, since we expect this conference to be, you know, one action-oriented conference. But that is a secret. But I think there's a role for not only political actors, but civil society organizations for spreading the message. I know here in Ghana, civil society in the past has been very powerful in mobilizing against decisions that were seen as not in the public interest. And so civil society does have the power to promote these visions, right? And it's also important to proceed gradually. You cannot run before you can walk, right? And so if you don't have a desk, you need to set your ambitions adequately low. And in some cases, NOCs cannot be expected to invest in the energy transition. In some cases, the game is, you know, proper management of the oil and gas sector, proper managing the revenues, you know, making sure they accrue to the state, and then the state can invest either directly or through sovereign wealth funds or public development banks or whatnot. And so it's very important to keep in mind at what stage you are, and that should guide you into what you can and cannot do. And politics is fundamental for that.
Okay, we are at our end stage. I'll take 3 questions or comments from the audience based on the role of NOCs in financing the energy transition, and then we can wrap this up. And then you can join his session later in the afternoon to get more insight. So any questions going? The sugar level is so low. No questions? Okay, so wrapping up, 3 things that you can point for NOCs to start doing in terms of actively participating and also contributing to the entire climate finance conversation.
Okay, so again, the recommendations are probably going to be context dependent, but I say firstly, focusing on the proper corporate governance mechanisms. Things like, independent people in the board of directors, greater transparency, professional management that can outlive administrations. I think corporate governance is fundamental, right? Secondly, having a frank discussion about the future of the oil and gas sector. Currently, I think a lot of people in Africa have embraced with a lot of enthusiasm the whole baby drill agenda. And I totally agree that Africa has a very low responsibility for global emissions. But at the same time, this is not about it's not a moral question. You have to look there is going to be a decline in oil and gas. So from a very pragmatic perspective, you need to have a very frank conversation. How do you see the future of the oil and gas sector, regardless of kind of ideological conversations, right? And the third one is to be very careful about the size of the plans, investments that countries are embarking in. I know there's a tendency to be very ambitious and to have these very kind of forward-looking development aspirations, but it's probably wiser to proceed step by step, bit by bit, and so don't take a step that is longer than your legs can allow for. And so that will be my third recommendation.
All right. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Please, let's appreciate him. Thank you for sharing with us. We are now at the point where people are excited. So you can clap harder. So we will take a break, a snack, coffee, health break, and also use that opportunity to visit a number of exhibitions that have been set up behind here. So we have some energy innovators that are showcasing innovations with regards to clean energy and others. So I entreat you to go there. And then we have just 25 minutes for all of that, all of what I've talked about. So grab a bite, go see the exhibitions, and then we'll move straight to our side events. We'll have the first set before we'll have lunch, so that you can have something to look forward to. The first set of side events, the first one, scaling innovation to power Africa, financing research for a just energy future by the Africa Center for Digital Transformation. That is virtual, and I know those of you who are interested, you have the link. NOC's peer learning session on just transition by the NRGI. Nicholas is going to be there as well. We have dialogue on just transition, the case of electric vehicle adoption by the UNDP, inclusive e-mobility for a just transition by the Center for Extractives and Development Africa. And then the fifth one, building Africa's resilient energy future, the role of traditional knowledge in clean energy innovation and transitions. Please, we are very pressed for time. So if you see me around nudging you like I did last year, encouraging you to move along, I hope that you'll be able to do that. Now, we have 3 of the side events. We are going to quickly partition this place. So there will be notices at the entrance by the time you come from your snack break. So we are expected to be back from our snack break by 12:40, so that we can start our side events. I wanted to say bon appetit, but some of you would go straight to the exhibition. So happy sightseeing. I'll see you soon.
Please, the side events are taking place here in this room, and also you see 2 marquee tents at the exhibition point. So, just as Kojo mentioned, scaling innovation to power Africa, financing research for a just energy transition is taking place virtually. We have NOC's peer learning session on just transition by the NRGI. It's taking place at the front here. That's when they partition it, this front, this one becomes the. We have powering productivity, linking energy access to enterprise growth and productivity. All right, so please, we can proceed outside. We will call them. Yes. Please, let's do the networking outside so that we get the technical team to partition the building for the next session.
Let's do our networking outside. You may proceed to the exhibition center of the park. Let's proceed to the exhibition center. You may proceed. Proceed to the exhibition center. You may proceed, go around and network. Ooh, the future of energy refurbishes my spirit. Think about the economic value. Think about the climate. Think about the details you will spill out. Celebrating the day. Well, let it be. From consumption to unlocking.
Please, let's carry the conversations outside.
Africa's power.
Let's carry the conversations
energy.
Outside.
Talk about
so that
the
we
value
can quickly
chain.
Convert the place for the side event.
Zero 244 380 107 is my number. 0244